Hey everyone, welcome back. In this second episode, you're going to hear Keon and Denise share more intentionally about the local Canadian church and what our response and posture could be as followers of Jesus with regards to systemic racism here in our country. Enjoy.
Not only looking at the evangelical church broadly in North America, but how can the Denise and Keon, how can the Canadian evangelical church, how can we become more aware of this? What are some things that are maybe unique to Canada that you guys are seeing? Or maybe they're not just unique to Canada, maybe it's the US too, but could you guys speak to that?
I think, it's interesting because I think there are broad concepts that we all need to be aware of and that we all need to be working toward. But I also think we need to recognize that there are really different histories in the United States and in Canada. So I think there are lots of Canadians who are seeing this issue. It's interesting, actually. There's people all over the world, right, seeing this happening, and they're having their own protests in their own countries, which is good. I think people need to become aware of these kinds of things. But there are also really specific things going on in the States due to the history of what has happened in the States and the history of slavery in America and the way our laws were written. And so that is really different from Canada. Not that Canada doesn't have its own issues, but there's a really specific thing happening in the States that I think people are tired of and they're speaking out against. And again, it's really easy in the States because everything in the States is political, for this to become a politicized issue when it shouldn't be, but that's what ends up happening. So then Christians kind of feel a need to pick a side based on their politics. And so it's kind of a whole mess, I think, in the States that confuses people and their theology. I think in Canada, there are, it's interesting, at least for me I'm limited, right? I live in Red Deer, which is kind of its own little pocket. But to me, the most similar kind of case in what I've seen in Canada is just the way people talk about the Native population in Canada, right? They're First Nations people, and the things that I've kind of heard people say about them would be similar to how some people would talk about Black people in the States. So I think that's a very that's the history for a lot of Canada. It's at least in Western Canada, what I've noticed. And so to me, that's for sure an issue that Canadians could be aware of and might want to work to change in that area. And when we talk about racism as a whole, and we talk about the church, I think we need to really look at biblically, what has God called us to as believers. And first and foremost, we obviously need to share the gospel and what Jesus has done in order to make a way for our salvation. But then in doing that, some of us want to stop at getting saved, and we forget that really faith, the way it's defined in the Bible, is belief plus action. And so those two things always have to go together, and they can't be separated. And so preaching the gospel doesn't mean that you sit back and don't do anything about issues of justice. We wouldn't say that, I think, for the issue of abortion, right? There would be a lot of Christians who would want to talk about that justice issue and work toward justice for the unborn. And the same should be true of racism and fixing those issues of injustice that have happened with race. And one thing I keep seeing come up on social media, and I see it from a lot of Christians, the way that people sometimes tend to push back is they get really frustrated about the idea of people who didn't commit these specific sins apologizing for them. So there will be people who say, well, I was never a part of slavery, or I was never a part of writing unjust laws. Why would I apologize for something that I didn't do? And that's interesting to me because I in a way I understand, right? We're all personally responsible for our sin. And so we're personally responsible to apologize to who we've wronged and to repent of those things personally. But at the same time, biblically, over and over and over in the Bible, you see examples of corporate repentance, of corporate punishment, of corporate blessing. So you see examples everywhere. The Israelites leave their homeland, they're exiled from their homeland, and they come back with their children who had never ever lived in Israel. And they have a big, huge ceremony where they publicly all repent for their sin. And these kids could be like, well, I wasn't part of that. You guys screwed all that up. But everyone repents. They're all a part of that process. We see God bless the entire nation of Israel because their king is being righteous. That doesn't mean every single person down the line is righteous, but their king is, and so they're blessed. And we see the opposite, where they're punished for what their king is doing, right? So the idea, I think of, well, I didn't do that, sure, but are there things that we corporately need to repent of as countries, as the church body, in order to better love our neighbor as ourselves? So I think if we think through that, where can I make sure my heart is right personally? And then how can we as a body of believers make sure our heart as a whole is right for those who might need it? I think that would be really good. And like Abena said, like, I think listening is just really important. And I find myself listening to people more and more, more than I used to, in all kinds of different areas. We all have different experiences that shape us, and whether they always make us think the right way about things or not, they're really personal to us. And so I think the more we can listen to people, the more we'll be able to understand where everyone is coming from. And that is helpful and opens our eyes to things that we just might not have experience with. And that's not wrong, but it means we're just ignorant about certain things that we might need to know more about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you too. I think this has been a problem that, that has been inherited, you know what I mean? Centuries and centuries and centuries. And it's, how ancestors, how we perceive to view black men and women, as a threat or whatever it may be, being questioned. I think, with the church's involvement, I think the opportunity to showcase love, and like Abena said earlier, this is a hard issue, you know what I mean? And I think this is an issue where, if you can sit and watch that video for 9 minutes of George Floyd, and your heart is not compelled, you know what I mean, or moved in a way of understanding and compassion, what I would say to that is Jesus has not activated it yet, for you to being able to see something like that. And I think this is a very important time for the church to be able to speak up, speak out, and showcase God's undying and unwavering love for everybody, to understand when one fall, we all fall, and I think that's what the body of the church is. It's everybody, it's all of us, we're all in this together. And so for us to be able to communicate in social forms, and maybe you disagree or agree with somebody's position, it's good to have a conversation going, but like Denise said, it gets to a point where it's political and where, these don't align with my political, values or the points who I support, knowing that, what would Jesus do? I think we tend to forget that, and we just like to wear the wristbands these days instead of actually, you know what I mean? People today are too busy, looking good instead of actually being good, and I think that's from the standpoint as a church where we need to continue to step forward and be the leading into changing and understand that we need to love thy neighbor as thyself.
Mm-hmm.